Okay, thank you very much, Ian. I'm not, just let me know if I'm audible.
Yes, Musa, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction, Ian. I think in our African culture, you know, when you're going to for a bride, I think we still have that thing where you do dowry negotiations and then you try to get as many cows as possible, especially from the bride side. I think if you go with Ian, I think you can manage to get a lot of cows for your bride. I think, Ian, you did a very good job doing the introduction. So I'll try to live up to all those things you've said that I can do. But otherwise, thank you everybody for joining us. So for my bit, basically it's just to talk about ISO 27001, one of my favorite topics. Just trying to here is to just tell us where it came from, because sometimes when we're trying to understand where we're going, an easy way to look at it is just understand, first of all, where you come from. It can explain a lot about where we're going. Now, when you look at ISO 27001, so right now we're talking about the fact that we're looking at a new version that has come out, that is the 2022 version. But then ISO 27001 as a standard has been with us for a very long time, right? So this is a slide that just takes us through the journey. So usually when people talk about 27001, the first thing they go back to is the first standard, which was 2005. But we were looking at information security management systems way before 2005. So going back actually into the 80s, it came up as a need for organizations to have some way in which they could standardize the implementation of information security controls. So you're looking at, if you wanted to do, for example, anti-malware, then probably you'd have an antivirus in place. If you wanted to secure your data center, for example, you'd have some physical security in place, you know, you'd put in controls. So the need was, how can we then standardize this so that we can say that if I'm starting from scratch and I want to put in control, that I have some reference that I can go to and quickly check and see that, yes, if I want to implement some security controls, I don't have to guess. I have somewhere I can check. And so therefore, that's why you saw, that's why you can see, like in the 80s and the early 90s, led by the Department of Trade and Industry in the UK, these companies came together and then they agreed on something they called a code of practice for information security management. So the code of practice is basically a listing of all the controls that they thought would be important to be implemented in an organization, and it was acting as a guide. So you didn't have to do it that way, right? But if you wanted to do it, then you had a good reference, which is the code of practice. Now, after that was done, being led by the DTI, the British Standards Institute, BSI, then takes it up, and in 1995, publishes a standard, a British standard called BS 7799, okay? So BS 7799 became a document that was published by the British Standards Institute, and then this document was actually exported globally, right? So you're looking at even organizations, even here in Africa, organizations in Asia, organizations even in the US, who wanted to actually implement information security and needed to just have a reference material. Most of them went to the BS 7799, which came out in 1995. So the 7799 is what? That is the code of practice. So remember that. Now, after organizations implemented these controls, then the need that arose was, how can we show that we have done it the right way? How can I provide evidence, for example, to stakeholders like regulators? How can I provide evidence to stakeholders like customers or partners to show evidence that I have actually implemented information security? So there came a need for the development of something like a certification schema, right? So that organizations could get certified against. So that's when now British Standard designed the part 2 of 7799. So in 1998, the part 2 of the 7799 was then published by BSI. Okay, so part 2 basically was for organizations that wanted to become certified. So it became a certification schema. So you could actually now have a certificate to show that you have implemented information security in your organization. So that's what part 1, remember, was the code of practice. Part 2 was the was a certification schema. Then again, they designed part 3. Now, part 3 is what became later known as 27005, which was the risk management guideline. So part 3 basically was 7799. Part 3 was how do you do risk management as you're implementing information security. Okay. Now, fast forward into 2000. Now, what ISO does, ISO designs, documents, standards, that are applicable to industry. So you can see that BS 7799 had been around for some time. And actually, as I was saying, it had become globally accepted. So organizations even here in Kenya would actually go for a BS 7799 part 2 certification. So it was actually globally accepted. So ISO took it up and decided to make it an ISO standard in the year 2000. Now, when they took it up, they took up the part 1, okay, which remember was the code of practice. And so they just called it, you can see they just reversed the numbers. So 7799 part 1, so they just started with 17799. So that became an ISO standard. But this ISO standard was specifically the code of practice. So of course, then there was need to do what? To then design a certification schema, right? So how do we design a certification schema? We already have a 17799. So what ISO did, they decided to just come up with a whole brand new numbering system. So they chose the 27,000 series, okay? So as they were creating their own certification schema, they decided to just come up with a new schema, a new series, which they say 27,000 will now be dedicated for information security. So 27,001 now became the certification schema for what we call an information security management system, okay? And then what happened to the code of practice? The code of practice then became 27002. Okay, that's what happened to the code of practice. So we now changed, we swapped, instead of part 1 being the code of practice, now according to ISO 27001 now is actually the requirements document, and then 2702 is the code of practice. Okay, so over the years, we've had several revisions being done of the standard, and now we are talking about, again, when we went to revising 27,001 from 2005, then it was revised, and then you had 27,001 in 2013, right? And then you had also 27002 being revised again, and you had it again in 2013 version, okay? Now, we have been using the 2013 version since that time, and then we have been going through revisions, okay? So again, 27002 was the first standard to be revised. The code of practice always the first that was revised. And then now, after that was revised, it was published, and then now we have the requirements document, which is 27,001, which again has now been revised. If we just go to the next slide, I'll just present a brief about how this revision is done by ISO. So just go to the next slide. Okay, so we have several stages in the development of standard that ISO goes through. So remember, ISO is the body that is responsible for, first of all, creation of standards, then the maintenance of standards, the updating of standards, right? And the publication of standards. That's what ISO does. And ISO actually stands for ISOs. It's ISOs is, I think everybody here must have done mathematics at some point, yeah? So if you remember your primary mathematics, or something we call an isosceles triangle, right? Which ISOs basically means same. So ISO means same, and that's what it means. It's standard, it's the same. When we talk about ISO in the UK, we talk about ISO in Kenya, we talk about ISO in Qatar, we talk about ISO in South Africa, it's the same. It's the same standards, the same set of requirements, right? So that's what ISO means. So the International Organization for Standardization. So ISO doesn't stand for ISO, as some people call it. So that's just something that I just needed to explain to you guys. So when we're developing standards, we go through certain steps. So typically there are 6 steps. So first of all is a proposal. The proposal is, as the name suggests, we have a new standard or a new requirement, right? For example, data protection was a new requirement. So that was a new work item which was proposed. We could have something like an existing standard, like, for example, 27,001. So it goes in also as a requirement, right? And then after that, we go into building the consensus. Now, the consensus is done through what we call TCs. TCs are technical committees. So we have a technical committee and SC is a special committee. Now in ISO, again, ISO is made up of member countries, okay? So we have more than 160 members of ISO, and these come from countries. So you'll find that every country has its representatives in ISO. Typically in this part of the world, those tend to be the national bureaus of standards, right? So like the Rwanda Bureau of Standards, the Kenya Bureau of Standards, the Uganda Bureau of Standards in this region will be the organizations that represent the country in ISO. Okay. Now within these organizations, there will be several TCs called technical committees. For example, in KEBS, which is in Kenya, it's called TC90. The technical committee has a number, it's called TC93. Now, this technical committee, it's the one that sits to discuss these new items or to revise, because standard is revised every 5 years. If there's nothing else that happens, every 5 years, the standard is revised. So the technical committees sit, and then you have what you call the committee draft. The first CD is a committee draft. So the committee draft is basically just as the name suggests, it's a draft document that they have come up with after they have first started to do the revision. Then after that, you get your publicly available specification, or we go into an ISO standard. This would be if we think about a very new work item, yeah? So like, for example, a standard that does not exist at all. But when you're talking about something like ISO 27001, which is already existing, you don't expect to see a publicly available specification. You expect to see that you're going to have a CD, that's a committee draft. Then when we go there, from there, now we go to part 3 and part 4. Now, if we want to fast track this, we could skip part 1 and part 2 and go straight into part 3 and part 4. That's why you can also call that fast track. Now, when we're in part 3 and part 4, what we have is we have our DIS, yeah, or technical specification, yeah. So a DIS basically stands for the Draft International Standard, right? So when a standard is being designed, developed, it first of all must be called a draft. So the draft is what we call the DIS, a Draft International Standard. So at that point, then we are still in the technical committee who sit and then discuss that Draft International Standard. After they have discussed it, then they will finalize it. So you have the FDIS, which is the final Draft International Standard. Now, that FDIS is what now goes to what we call voting. So voting is done again by technical committees. And when voting has been done, then we have what we call a working draft, yeah? And then working draft is what will go into ISO, and ISO will now finalize it. And then you go into step 6, which is now the publication of the standard, right? So this is a very structured way that ISO basically maintains or manages standards and makes sure that standards are being reviewed every year. Now, what has happened in the last 2 years, especially because of COVID, it really has hampered this process, right? Because people have not been meeting as they should have. So technical committees have not been meeting as often. Had to be, changed up, had to be taken to, remote like those, which really how fast documents have been made in the last few years. But we fully expect that this will change. Now, let me just present what has now happened with 7001 using the same journey. So if you look at 27001, at the top there, we have the 2013 version. Moved through the stages. So we have from stage 0 all the way to stage 60 is where it was published, right? And then now, after that, they started being revised. When it started being revised, moved into stage 90. After what was published, which is down here, it now went to 95, which is withdrawal. And now it has been revised by the 2022 version. Now, if you come look at this down here we have the 2022 version. So look at how many steps it has gone through. So it has gone through stage 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and now it is at 60 is publication, which is just goes hand in hand with what I was showing you, which was step number 6. So we are at now 60, where the standard has now published, right? And it will do 5 years, and then it will go to stage 90. Stage 90 is revision. So after it has done 5 years, it will go to stage 90 where it will start being revised, and then it will go into stage 95 for withdrawal when there's another version which has come in. So this is just something I wanted to explain so that you can understand how ISO manages standards, how the work of standards drafting is done throughout the world. Okay, so what is 27001? So let's just understand a bit where we are with 2013 before we understand what is new in 2022. So in 2013, this is the first time looking at the move from 2013, move from 2005 to 2013, we had a very structured standard, right? So there's something in ISO called Annex SL. Annex SL is a what you call a standard format for ISO standards. It's a standardized format. So all standards that came up from ISO from the year 2012, have adopted a standard framework. Okay, that standard framework is called Annex SL. So you have a standard high level structure for your 2013, and basically it has this shape. It has context, which is always clause 4. So first of all, we have clause 0 to clause 3. So clause 0, clause 1, clause 2, clause 3 are generic. Those are generic standards. They don't talk about specific things that you have to think about when you're implementing an ISMS in an organization. So when you want to implement an ISMS, you have to think about what are the requirements. The requirements are stipulated in the clauses, these clauses that you're seeing here. So from clause 4 to clause 10, right? And clause 4 talks about context of the organization, while 5 talks about leadership, clause 6 talks about planning, and clause 7 talks about support. Now, if we look at our plan, do, check, act cycle, then these clauses are the ones that are considered to be related to the planning phase of your management system. When you go to the operations phase, you have clause 8. And then when you need to check to make sure that the management system is actually achieving its intended outcomes, then you're at the check phase, that is clause 9. And then to get improvement, you're in the act phase, you're in clause 10. Now, this is a high level structure, and it is the Annex SL. So you expect to see all requirements documents like the quality management system, ISO 9001, they have the same shape. So even with 9001, it still has clause 4 to clause 10. Clause 4 will still talk about context of the organization. Clause 7 will talk about support. Clause 9 will talk about performance evaluation, and 10 will talk about improvement. So it's the same standard. Business continuity, ISO 22301, same shape, right? The reason why they look like the reason why ISO decided to standardize the format is so that organizations that implement more than one standard, can then have a way of integrating them. So that if you implement ISO 27001 in your organization, you also choose to implement business continuity 22301. You also choose to implement quality management ISO 9001. You do not have to have duplication of things. You can actually use, some of these things are very similar, right? So you can actually be able to integrate your management systems. Now, the other thing which is very important to notice, which is unique to the information security standard, is this thing called the annex. So when you're looking at information security, we always consider control objectives, and controls. So we implement controls to achieve control objectives. Now, remember our good old 7799, where it came from? That code of practice, right? So we still carry it with us. That code of practice is what you see in the annex. So the code of practice is basically ISO 27002, okay? Now, in the annex on 27001 is a summary. It's a summary of 27002, which you see within 27001. So they are always linked. So ISO 27001 2013 had an annex, which was basically linking to ISO 27002 2013 version. You see, so they're actually linked. So the moment 27002, the 2022 version came out, then definitely 27001 had to also change, because then the reference is very direct. Okay. The annex is self-explanatory. It is a number of controls. These controls are divided into control objectives. Rather, they are supposed to achieve control objectives. And then these control objectives are divided into security domains. So we usually have 14 security domains. These security domains start from A5 to A18, right? And there are 14. They start from A5 because that is linking directly with 27002, which is clause 5. So if you look at 27002, clause 5 talks about information security policies. Clause 10 talks about cryptography. Clause 15 talks about supplier relationships, for example. And clause 18 talks about compliance. So it is basically linked with 27002. So that's why in the annex, it starts from A5. It doesn't start from A1, for example. So it starts from A5 to A18 because of that link. So this is how 27001 2013 looks like, and this is how 27002 2013 looks like. So now we go into how 27001 2022 version looks like and the new changes you expect to see. So let me just look at that cycle first of all. Let me present to you the changes. Yes, thank you. So the main changes you expect to see, and now this I'll let my colleague go deeper into each one of these changes. So I'll just give you a brief. So one of the first changes is the title of the standard itself, and you'll see in more detail. The standard previously was just talking about IT and technical security. Now we have issues around cybersecurity and privacy protection. There are some changes within the clauses 4 to 10, and Faith will take us into detail. And we also have new controls. So 27002 has been changed completely, right? So it has been redesigned. So you will see that it is actually a very interesting look to the annex. It's a very interesting look to the annex. Then the control structure, of course, we used to have, as I've just shown you, Annex A controls, which we had 14 security domains. We had 35 control objectives. We have 114 controls. So that has changed also with the new standard. And then also the controls themselves have reduced in number from 114 to 93, which basically you think that should make it a bit easier for us to be able to implement them. It should make it a bit easier for us, even if you're auditors, if there are any auditors here, it should make it even a bit easier for you to actually be able to audit that standard. Yeah. So having said that, well, let me let the next speaker to come in, Faith, come in, so that now she can take us through each and every angle of these changes to give us more insight on exactly what you expect to see when you look at the new version of the standard.
Great. Good. Thank you very, very much, Musa, for that very elaborate introduction into the concept of ISO 27001, what it's all about, walking us through the history. I think it helps a lot, even as now we look at the changes that are coming in version 2022 and what to expect. Yeah. So in the next 15 to 20 minutes, allow me to just dive deeper into the main changes as presented here of ISO 27001, now from version 2013 to version 2022. And then thereafter, we're going to look at now, what then does this mean to organizations? Yeah, if at all you had been certified against version 2013, then what does that mean to you? Also, if you're looking to implement information security management system, what does that mean? Yeah, are you going to do it again as version 2013? Are you going to do it again as version 2022? So we're going to look at that after this. But maybe just to start us off, the first one is, of course, the name change. Yeah. This has to be one of the things that you notice immediately after you look at the new standard. So from this side, what you have is, on the left side is the version 2013. Yeah, so it was the standard for information technology security techniques, the information security management systems requirement. Yeah, so that is primarily what it was called in version 2013. Now in version 2022, the standard has been renamed to incorporate aspects of information security, cyber security, and privacy protection. Yeah, so now the ISMS, the ISO 27001 standard is going to look at so much more. It's going to incorporate aspects of cybersecurity when we're looking at cloud security aspects, when we're looking at, different cybersecurity properties, then those have been incorporated into the new version, as well as privacy, data privacy, and also aspects of protection. Yeah, again, those ones have been incorporated into this standard, and I think that is very, very, it's so timely, and especially because as you know, there is ISO 27701 for implementation of a privacy information management system. And so by virtue of introduction of privacy aspects in version 2022 of ISO 27001, it really sort of lays a groundwork for implementation of ISO 27701. As you know, for any organization to implement the ISO 27701 standard, that is a standard for privacy, you have to have an ISMS. So the PIMS rides on top of the ISMS, yeah? And so implementation or adoption of some privacy aspects into ISO 27001 makes it easy for organizations to even and now transition into 27701. Okay. And then over and above that, so what Musa presented was the structure of ISO 27001, which is mainly in two parts. So we have the main clauses or the mandatory clauses from clause 4 to 10. And then we have the Annex A, which are not mandatory, but are required. Yeah, so quote unquote mandatory regardless. So again, what I'm going to present here is going to be the changes, looking at first in the mandatory clauses of the standard that is from clause 4 to 10, and also the changes in Annex A. So to start us off, we have clause 4. So clause 4 is about the context of the organization, and here we've experienced changes in the two main subclauses. So in clause 4.2, ideally this clause talks about understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties in the organization. So you're setting up an ISMS, you have to understand who you are, what are your processes, what are the processes that are outsourced, and then you also identify the relevant interested parties. So in this case, you have regulators, you have stakeholders, yeah, you have your customers, you have your staff, and so on and so forth. So the main change here is that now the expectation is that you're going to identify the relevant requirements of interested parties in clause 4.2b, and also there is an introduction of clause 4.2c, which expects an implementing organization to determine which of the requirements of the needs and expectations of the interested parties are going to be met through the implementation of the ISMS. So previously what we do is we just list them down there. Yeah? So you have all the relevant parties and then their needs and expectations. But then now in 4.2c, you have to go down and list again, what are the requirements of these interested parties that are going to be met through the implementation of the ISMS. Then in clause 4.4, where you just basically looks at the implemented information security management system. Previously, in version 2013, how it read was that the organization shall establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve an information security management system in accordance with the requirements of this standard. Yeah, but now the wording has been changed to include including the processes needed and their interactions in accordance with the requirements of this standard. So among the key things that have changed with version 2022 is that, again, there is more focus and more there's more focus on processes. Yeah, the fact that we're no longer just looking at thinking about it from an assets perspective, IT assets perspective, but also there's a huge focus on processes, their interactions, and how they affect the information security management system. So that is how it has been rewarded to read. Then the other clause that is changing is also clause 6.1.3, that is information security risk treatment. So first, one thing that you'll notice is that in version 2013, the statements the sentences tend to be very long. Yeah, it just used to be one long sentence with a couple of requirements inside. But now in version 2022, revised to become it's been broken down in a brief manner, and most of sentences that have been broken down into, pointers, yeah? So that is the first thing that has changed in clause 6.1.3. And also over and above that, the note 2, previously the statement in note 2 for C 6.13C is basically Annex A contains a list of contains a comprehensive list of control objectives and controls. So basically that's how it used to say, that it contains a comprehensive list of control objectives and controls, and then goes on to say that you are expected to go to Annex A to select controls to treat your risks, to ensure that you're really not overlooking any controls. So how it read previously was that, Annex A it sort of made you think that Annex A has all the controls that you actually need to treat your risks or to implement your information security management system. But now the revision goes on to say that Annex A contains a list of possible information security controls. And then there's a note above that that actually goes on to say that you're not limited only to the controls in Annex A or ISO 27002 for you to select controls to treat your risks, but rather you can look at other sources. And so I think this change now, saying that Annex A contains a list of possible information security controls is more guiding, and it helps you to know that if I'm treating risks, if there are any nonconformities that I'm identifying in my environment, then Annex A has a list of possible information security controls that I can actually adopt to improve my information security management system. Okay. Then we move on again to look at clause 6. So there is also a major change in clause 6.2, and 6.2 looks at information security objectives and how you're planning to achieve them. So as part of the planning phase, you identify information security objectives in accordance with the policy that you came up with in clause 5. And these information security objectives are supposed to provide a roadmap of what are the things for our information security management system. What are some of the things that could actually, that could be a cause for us not achieving our strategic objectives insofar as information security is concerned, or for the organization in general? Again, what are some of the things that we want to focus on? Maybe it's because of it's a requirement, it's a regulation, and some of these objectives could be that if this particular objective is not monitored closely, if it is not tracked, then it could actually lead to exploitation of a risk which could have adverse impacts to the organization. So you come up with information security objectives, right? Which could be things such as we intend to ensure that 100% of all endpoints in the environment are covered with a corporate antivirus, yeah? Or it could also be to ensure that all users in the environment are removed from systems. So access is removed immediately. Users leave the organization or transition roles, change roles, yeah? And so once you have those objectives, then that is what you come up with in clause 6.2. Now, what has changed in clause 6.2 is that they've introduced two requirements. So the first one is that the information security objectives you set out must be monitored, and also they must be made available as documented information. That was not explicit in version 2013. Also, the aspect of monitoring, you would actually come across it in clause 9.1 when you're doing monitoring, measurement, and evaluation of the ISMS. See, so now in clause 6.2, when they introduce the aspect of it, the information security objectives being monitored, it already sets you as an implementer, if you're implementing the information security management system, then there's an expectation that you're not coming up with information security objectives for them to just sit pretty, but instead they actually are supposed to be monitored, and the results of the monitoring and measurement of these information security objectives is what is going to be looked at in clause 9.1. Okay, and then over and above that, we have clause 6.3, which is it's a totally new clause that has been implemented in version 2022. In version 2013, we only have 6.1 and 6.2. And so 6.3 is planning of changes. So as Musa mentioned, ISO standards, the implementation follows the PDCA cycle, the PDCA process, that is planning, doing, checking, and acting. Clause 6 primarily falls in planning. And then clause 8 is doing. Now, when it comes to planning of changes and monitoring changes, the first time in version 2013, you would come across anything to do with changes and change management would be in clause 8, which is the actual doing, where you're supposed to, the organization is supposed to plan and control changes in the organization. But then you see that is in the doing phase. So there is nowhere in the planning phase where there was an introduction of, there's an expectation that processes and controls are supposed to be monitored for any changes and that changes are supposed to be planned. So clause 6.3 comes in now to actually talk about that there's an expectation that when you're looking at processes, you're going to ensure that whenever there is a change in any process, that the change management process basically comes into play to manage how these changes are going to be done. The key thing to note again here is that there's really no explicit mention of what these processes are. So it's left up to you to, decide then what are these processes that are in the scope of the ISMS that we really need to ensure that we plan how changes are going to occur on them. Okay, then moving on is clause 7.4 on communication. So the clause on communication basically expects that whenever there are changes in the ISMS, or whenever there's something that needs to be communicated to the relevant parties in the ISMS, that shall be done according to a documented process. Yeah. Now, version 2022 has revised the clause 7.4 to drop two things. So clause D that talks about who shall do the communication, and clause E that talks about the processes for effecting that particular communication have been dropped, rather merged into one clause D, which just says how to communicate. And I think this is very important because previously when you're doing, when I've been doing implementations with different clients, you find that different organizations communicate differently. Yeah, the channels are different. What they consider to be corporate lines of communication in one organization differs completely with what another organization considers to be official communication. So again, here, standard is leaving it to the organization to determine, how shall we communicate? What are the channels? Who's doing this communication? What time of day is it going to be done? As long as you have a process or a way of how this particular communication is going to happen, then that's okay. So now organizations have that, you have that leeway to determine what is the best way to do communication in a fast and effective way. Right. Then moving on, we also have clause 8.1, where now we've moved away from the changes that have happened in the planning phase of the PDCA cycle. Now we're looking at the changes that have happened in the doing phase of the PDCA, and that is in clause 8. So in operational planning and control, the most important thing to mention here is that, again, the change, the statement has been reworded to now say that the organization shall plan, implement, and control processes needed to meet requirements and to implement the actions determined in clause 6. So then again, as already mentioned, where previously it was just saying that you need to have a plan on how you're going to achieve information security objectives, that has changed completely. And now it's just looking at processes in general. Yeah. So the processes in the ISMS, how do you plan, implement, and control those processes, as well as implement the actions that you determined in clause 6 when it comes to the risks and opportunities that have been identified. Over and above that, the other thing that I noticed that has changed is that now there is a requirement to control externally provided processes, products, or services. Yeah. So it talks about processes, products, or services. Previously in version 2013, it was talking about processes only. So now we have products also and services. And the other thing that has changed is that in version 2013, these processes, especially talks about processes that are outsourced. Yeah. And so how different organizations would interpret outsourcing was different. And so the language there has been changed to be more guiding, and instead of outsourced processes, products, and services, it says externally provided processes. Yeah. So anything that is externally provided, again, you're expected to control how those processes, products, and services are plan are implemented and how changes occur to them. Okay. Then we move on to look at clause 9.1. Now we are in the checking phase. So clause 9 is checking, yeah? So clause 9.1 in monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. Here is just a change in the wording between 2013 and 2022. So in 2013, it used to say that the organization shall retain appropriate documented information as evidence of the monitoring and measurement results. Okay. Now 2022 has been reworded to make it very brief and guiding, and says documented information shall be available as evidence of the results of now the performance monitoring and measurement of the objectives identified in clause 6. I think that is very good. It becomes very clear that if you have documented information security objectives and you have come up with a plan to achieve them, the resources, then in clause 9, you're expected to keep evidence of implementation of these objectives and their monitoring, and over and above that, the results should exist as documented information. Yeah. So I think that's pretty straightforward and explanatory, self-explanatory. Then the other change that has happened in clause 9 is in internal audit. So clause 9.2 looks at internal audit. Previously, in 2013, we just used to have one clause, that is clause 9.2, that talks about internal audit, what you're supposed to do in internal audit, what you're checking against, and also went on to talk about the internal audit program. It was one long clause. So now what has happened is that clause 9.2 has been split into clause 9.2.1, which basically talks about the internal audit of the ISMS, how it should be done and everything. And then now clause 9.2.2 specifically just talks about the internal audit program. Yeah. So it has the requirements again of what should be in an internal audit program, what it should contain, and its purpose. So I think that's very important, because what I saw again previously with the implementing version 2013 is that whenever we're conducting an audit, you'd find that we have the internal audit plan. So yes, I can show that every year I'm conducting an internal audit of the management system, but then there's no program that shows, the broad perspective of internal audit of the management system. Who are the auditors, the program that, sets out the expectations in terms of controls are we auditing at which audit cycle, and so on and so forth. And so now 9.2.2 is very clear on the internal audit program and the expectations out of that control. And then another exciting change again is in management review, and that is in clause 9.3. So in one thing that one clause that has been introduced in 9.3 is that when you're conducting a management review, that is when top management that is represented by the ISMS Steering Committee sits down to look at the results of risk assessment, looks at the results of internal audit, any non-conformities that have been raised and how they're supposed to be treated. It goes on to also look at feedback from interested parties. Yeah. And then the other thing that was happening was that we were monitoring changes to monitoring changes to the context of the organization, basically. But now in 9.2.2, Part C has been introduced to monitor changes in the needs and expectations of interested parties that are relevant to the information security management system. And so what does this mean? It means that, again, as an organization, we're expected to keep abreast with any changes that are happening in the context of the organization, both within and also externally. So say, for example, you're an organization in Rwanda that is under the regulation of RURA. Yeah, so we have the RURA cybersecurity compliance, which basically lists out like a couple of requirements of organizations that are regulated by that particular body. Now, whenever there is a change in the needs and expectations of RURA in that cybersecurity regulation, then here the expectation is that as part of the management review, whenever the management meets to look at the information security management system, some of the things they shall look at include those particular changes in the requirements of the requirements of RURA. Yeah, in this case, RURA, using that example. Okay. Then last but not least, a minor change in clause 10, which is the acting phase of the PDCA. that's improvement. In version 2013, the first clause 10.1 was non-conformity and corrective actions, and then 10.2 would be continual improvement. Now that has been changed, and in version 2022, 10.1 is continual improvement. Yeah. So because the clause is primarily looking at continual improvement, so clause 10.1 comes up there to basically, be the focus of clause 10, which is acting, is that you're improving the ISMS. And how do you do that? You treat your risks. If there are any gaps identified in your information security management system, you're fixing that. If there are any weaknesses that are reported by, your interested parties, again, those are actually fixed, and that goes on to support the aspect of continual improvement. And then now 10.2 stays, which is non-conformity and corrective actions, basically showing that out of the audit conducted in clause 9, that now we're actually looking at the non-conformities raised, also any non-conformities that could be reported by any of our interested parties. Yeah. So basically non-conformities that are raised, how are they identified? And then corrective actions, how do we go on to fix the non-conformities identified? So that's the first part. Then moving on now to the new controls, that is ISO 27002. So ISO 27002 changed, then went on to now the changes in ISO 27001. Yeah. So ISO 27002 is Annex A, aka Annex A. Yeah. So the controls that have been now introduced are super exciting. I think because they also speak to the technology space as is right now. So we're looking at number one, threat intelligence. So now there's an expectation that organizations implementing an ISMS are going to look at sources to collect threats to the ISMS, and also consider these particular results of the threat intelligence to improve the ISMS. The second control that has been introduced is information security for the use of cloud services. Yeah. Previously, we just used to take all the controls to be applicable also to, systems that are sitting on the cloud. But then again, now this control now looks at, what are the information security controls that we are implementing insofar as cloud services are concerned. The third control is ICT readiness for business continuity. This marries with clause S17, yeah, version 2013 we had clause S17 talks about business continuity in information security. So now there is a control that looks at how ready in terms of systems infrastructure are we insofar as business continuity is concerned. How it was previously in S17, there was no direct correlation when it comes to how we recovering ICTs from a disaster recovery perspective. Yeah. So how we backed up our ICTs, what is the recovery plan? And so this particular control now then comes in to actually talk about that. And then we have the fourth one, which is physical security monitoring. Yeah. To be honest, what I found was that whenever we were doing the implementation with version 2013, when it comes to physical security, there was that expectation that fine, the office has a CCTV camera. If it's a banking hall, there's a CCTV camera there. But then there was no explicit control to expect that the results or the feed out of these cameras are actually being monitored, and that someone is picking out any non-conformities in real time. So again, now this comes into play where now there is an expectation that we're going to be doing physical security monitoring. Something of importance to note here is that it has to be in line with data protection and data privacy regulations, because also those have some very strict expectations when it comes to monitoring persons and what that means to infringement of the personal privacy. Yeah. So then again, the implementation of that control has to be again in line with compliance to the relevant and applicable data protection and privacy regulations. Then the fifth is data leakage prevention, both from a CIA perspective, looking at availability bit, actually looking at the confidentiality bit, but also again looking at privacy, yeah, expectations from data protection and privacy laws. So how are we protecting information and ensuring that there's no leakage? And then the other is data masking, again, relating to protection of personally identifiable information, where it's sitting on information systems. How has it been masked? Okay, apologies for that. Then the other is information deletion. Now, this is the one that looks at the aspect of availability of information. So when information is being deleted, is it being deleted within the right parameters? And also looking at expectations when it comes to data privacy laws, again, information being deleted, again, after the need for, processing. So then again, being able to marry those two things to ensure that you're still achieving compliance with the applicable laws and regulations, but also meeting the requirements of the standard. Then we have configuration management. This was brought in to basically speak a bit to ISO 20000, that is the standard for IT service management. So when it comes to configurations, configurations on the systems that are in scope, how do we manage them? How do we back them up? How do we ensure that they are kept in a safe and secure place, that they cannot actually be leaked or land in the wrong hands? Then we have the 9th control, which is monitoring activities. So monitoring activities for the ISMS. Then we have clause 10, looking at cybersecurity, that is web filtering. Here again, the expectation being that, there's some sort of web filtering in the network to prevent users from actually visiting malicious sites online, which broaden the risk surface for the organization. And then last but not least, we have secure coding. Again, here looking at specifically whether we're doing coding internally or it's outsourced, what are the parameters within which secure coding is being done. Right, so that's that with the new controls. The other thing is that is exciting with ISO 27002 is that over and above introducing these new controls and also merging and making them 93 instead of 114, we have attributes. So what attributes are coming in to do is that they're helping anybody who's implementing and adopting these controls to know what control is fit to treat which particular risk, or what control is actually the best fit to ensure that I manage this particular gap that I have in information security. So the first one is, the first attribute is control types. So ISO 27002, before each control, there's a table that says, in terms of the control type, if say, for example, we're looking at a control such as password management systems, So what kind of control type is it? Is it preventive? Is it corrective? And is it also detective? So it helps you to know which control is preventive, corrective, detective, very guiding, I think, whenever you're looking at adopting these controls. The second attribute is information security properties. So, the CIA triad. Again, when you're implementing a control, it basically sheds more light into, if you say, for example, implement a control whereby we are doing background screening for all employees before they are hired, what is it? What kind of characteristic is it of information security is it actually helping with? Is it helping you preserve confidentiality? Is it helping you preserve integrity or availability? Other thing is also cybersecurity concepts. So this is being taken directly out of ISO 27110, that is basically looking at, again, what are the concepts in, again, I think it also marries with NIST. Again, so when you're choosing a control, when you're implementing a control, is it helping you to identify weaknesses? Is it helping you to protect the environment? Is it helping you to detect any intrusions? Is it helping you to respond or recover? Then also another attribute is operational capabilities. And this is especially where now you're divvying up work. So you're saying, for example, for this control, for it to be measured, for this objective to be measured effectively, or for this control to be implemented effectively, it needs to sit in HR, or it needs to sit, maybe it's the organizational capability is in physical security. So that is what operational capabilities comes in to help you map the control with the right department to implement that control in the organization. I think that is very, very exciting. And then last but not least, again, we have security domains, and the security domains that have been described, we have governance and ecosystem, we have protection, defense, and also resilience. So this is bringing in a perspective of the different information security fields that we have. Right. Then last but not least, then over and above that, previously the Annex A controls were, they were categorized into security domains, that is the 14 security domains. Now the categories have changed, and what we have are 4 key categories. So the 93 controls have been merged into 4 categories. So we have organizational controls, where we have 37 controls, and this is basically looking at controls such as, policies and procedures. So these are the controls that are implemented from an organization perspective. Then we have the people controls. This is basically, it's basically A7, yeah? In 2013, it used to be Annex A7, that was human resource security. So again, controls around screening, controls around, contracting. So those ones come into people controls, and we have 8 controls there. Then we have physical controls, that is primarily looking at A11 of 2013, Annex A11, that used to look at physical security. Now those ones have been bunched up into physical controls, and we have 14 of them. And then the last category is technological controls. So all the other controls, we used to have cryptographic controls, we used to have incident monitoring, incident management, malware, monitoring, logging and monitoring. All those controls now have been put in the technological controls category, and there we have 34 controls. And then another thing that is exciting to note is that primarily what you would be looking at whenever you're looking at controls to protect an information security framework, you look at people, processes, and technology. But now we're looking at, so it's no longer PPT, it's PPP and T. So we have people, process, technology, and also physical. Yeah. And then the other thing, again, to guide with the implementation is that if you have implemented version 2013, your SMS against version 2013, then it does not mean that the 114 controls that you had said are compliant in your statement of applicability, then you have to throw them out because now we're moving to version 2022 and it has 93 controls. No. So what version 2022, that is ISO 27002, has done is that it has actually come up with 2 tables. So we have table B1, which does a mapping between ISO 27002 version 2022 and version 2013. And then we have version B2 that does the vice versa. So if you had implemented version 2013, for example, when you're doing the migration, whenever it comes to your SOA, where you had Annex A511 and A512 that was talking about policies for information security, now that is represented as A51 in version 2022, yeah? Where you're looking at A614 in 2013 that was looking at contact with special interest groups, now that in version 2022 is mapped to control A56. So the 2022 version of ISO 27002 is very helpful also when it comes to helping to manage the transition and to see how you can transition the version that you have of the information security management system to be compliant with version 2022. Yeah, so I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm going to invite Musa to come in also now just to introduce the speaker. Will be talking about, how do we go on to transition? What does it mean if you're certified now with this version and so on and so forth? So Musa.
Thank you, Mueni. So without taking too much time, first of all, I need to be very honest with everybody that we are very glad that you're still here. You could be watching football. So we will not keep you much longer than we have to. So the next person who is going to speak to us, basically, he represents a certification body. So as you know, when you're implementing a management system, when you have finished the implementation, then you're going for certification. This is usually done by an independent organization, usually called a certification body. The certification body is usually independent of the implementation. They don't take part in the implementation at all. They do a very independent review of the management system, and then based on that, they're able to certify you. So because of that, of course, they are also a very interested stakeholder when a standard moves from one version to another. So with us today is Mike Kamau. Mike Kamau is a managing director of CertiTrust of East and Central Africa, CertiTrust being a global certification body. So I'd just like to invite Mike, if you can hear me, you can just take over and just give us your presentation. Mike.
Thank you, Musa. Hi to all participants. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes, you are, Mike.
Thank you, Ian. Let's just jump into the slides, then I can take up. Thank you, Ian. So what has happened is ISO has given us a 3-year window period to be able to do the transition. And the transition started now in September 2022 when we are having the release dates. So from September 2022 all the way to 2025 is when we are able to do the transition. So let me first of all start to take you through the ISO certification, the stages, so that you can be able to understand the transition. So for any ISO certification audit that you go through, it goes through 3 phase stages. That is, the first stage is an initial audit, which we call, that is the year 1, where you are doing 2 stages of stage 1 and 2. So what it means in stage 1, we are actually going through your documents, trying to see whether you actually have a management system in place. Then stage 2, we are able to come into your site, either physically or remotely, and be able to have maybe interview, do site visits to your maybe your disaster recovery sites and stuff like that. So that one is the initial audit. Then out of the audit, we are able to recommend you either for certification or not. So once you are certified, then you need to maintain this standard or this management system over a period of 3 years before you seek, you go through a renewal. So there will be a surveillance audit in year 2, then there's a surveillance audit in year 3. Then after the 3 years, then you seek a recertification. So you go the whole process again. So basically that's the stages. So now based on that, between now January, the whole of next year, that is January to December 2023, new and existing certificates can be can be assessed against the old certification, that is the 27001 2013 version. So we have several clients across who are already on 27001. So those who are doing renewals, those who are doing surveillance, they can be able to do that. So this one will actually go all the way to March 2024. So after March 2024, then there will be no initial or recertification audits. I hope that makes sense. So March 2024, if you are applying for a new certification, that is the audit for year 1, or you are going under the recertification, then that one won't be possible. It will only be, you can be able only to apply for the current version of 2022. After that, then after 2025, that is September 2025, now all 27001 2013 certificates will be null and void. So that's the last day to be able to actually, the validity of the old 27001 2013 will be valid. So basically that's the journey. So it gives us a very good opportunity for those who are already having an existing standard to be able to start mapping out and planning out how can I be able to transit to the new 2022. The other advantage is also giving us, because this transition also bring in an issue of resources. So time, manpower, financial. So what this transition period gives us is an opportunity to be able to do that planning. Then at what point can you do this transition? So for those who already have a standard, they already are certified against 27001 2013. If you are doing a recertification, you can be able actually to ask your certification body to be able to recertify you against the new standard of 2022. Or if you are due for your surveillance, you can actually request for a 2022 version. Or if you don't have those audits coming up anytime soon and you wish to transit immediately, you can actually be able to ask for a special audit from your certification body. So those are the areas that gives you an opportunity to be able to do the transition. So if there are any other questions, I'll be able to take up at the end of the session. Back to you, Musa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you very much. I hope everybody who has any questions, please feel free to post. So that we can be able to give you the answer. So before I just complete, and then we go to the next phase, which is to be able to take your questions. I just want to emphasize on one thing. There is a lot of change now, and we're talking about processes more and more and more. When you look at the standard, it talks a lot more about process, not just controls. And that is important. It's an important difference to take note of. One of the things that we have to remember is the risk assessment process. The risk assessment process is the core of ISO 27001. The evolution from 2005 to 2013 in the risk assessment process actually removed the emphasis of the asset-based risk assessment. So if you had a chance to look at the 2005 ISO 27001 standard, you'd see that in the risk assessment phase, there was one clause which was dedicated towards identifying assets, identifying the criticality of assets, identifying the threats, and identifying the vulnerabilities to the assets. It was very specific. And we had to also identify asset owners, right? So that was removed in 2013, because in 2013, the emphasis was now more on you doing a risk assessment that was aligned to your ERM, Enterprise Risk Management Framework in the organization. Now we can see with the 2020 version, there is movement towards more integration, and even the risk assessment process you're supposed to have is supposed to be based on ISO 31000, which is again just a generic guideline for performing risk assessments. Now, in my practice and in my experience, I've seen that there's a lot of hang-ups, let me call it that. When we do risk assessments for SMS, we really like to bring in the issue of assets. And I think that's because most of us have a technical background. And so then we bring that into the implementation of the SMS when you really focus on assets when you're doing risk assessments. My advice is let us try and adopt more of business risk management processes, and then adopt that into our information security, rather than focus it on a very technical, rather focus on the technologies, and then now try to see how can this then map to the business. So with that, thank Mike for being a guest speaker today and representing the certification body. And then I'd like to hand it back to Ian to take us to the next session.
Good. Thank you, Musa and Mueni. And guys, as I told you, we have greatness in the room. That was Mike Kamau, the director of Sati Trust Eastern and Central Africa. So we are grateful and we are glad that Mike, you found time to share with us. So at least we wanted to give you guys a whole package so that now any questions will be able to be addressed right here